Hello and welcome to the European Parliament in Brussels. Today we'll look at the EU-China relationship. The European Union is China's largest trading partner, while China is the European Union's first source of imports. But is this a balanced relationship? Well, I'll put this question to my guest who will soon join me on this set. And in the second part of the programme, I'll talk to a man who needs little introduction, Jean-Claude Trichet, the former head of the European Central Bank, who will tell us what he thinks of the ECB's response to the Eurozone debt crisis. But let's start on our set at the European Parliament to talk about the relationship between China and the European Union. Let me introduce you to my two guests on this set. To my right, Elmar Brok. Hello, you're a German MEP from the European People's Party. You're close to Chancellor Merkel, and you're also a member of the Delegation for Relations with China. Also on this set, Chinese journalist Xiangjuan Miao. Very welcome to our program. You're the EU correspondent for the news agency Xinhua. Thank you very much for being with us. And I'd like to start with you, Mr. Brok. We're hearing more and more Europeans complain about China. They say that Chinese companies are dumping their products on the European market. They're receiving illegal subsidies from the state. They're saying, in a nutshell, that this relationship is not fair, is not balanced. What is your view on this?
I think every country is the member of the WTO, what China is now, has to keep the rules, and therefore subsidies which are destroying fair competition are illegal. And if there's any hint from certain sectors of industry, the European Union has to check that. It's the legal duty of the European Union to do that, for example, because of anti-dumping. And then we have to find out whether this is true or not. And there's also the other side, that there is still not a fair market economy there, or market economy status. First of all, the subsidies. Secondly, that as a condition in public procurement, which are not fair, especially on a regional level. And also the question, for example, that you can get not a majority of a company in China. You will own until 49% or something like that. And that is very often such investments combined that you have transfer know-how. So it's a lot of reasons that companies now more and more become afraid.
Xiangjuan Miao, what is the view from Beijing? Do officials in China understand the worries? Are they happy with the current relationship?
Well, I personally think that they understand some of the worries from the European side. But as we say that in a private business relationship, one always is thinking that the other one is taking advantage of him, right? But I think trade always makes, or often makes, two parties better off, as we say. So as in this China-EU business relationship, I think it's actually a good thing that we are seeing more and more disputes and problems, because that's a very good, strong evidence to see that the EU and China are having closer and deeper partnership.
And sometimes you agree to disagree. That was apparently the case during the EU-China summit, which took place 2 weeks ago here in Brussels. Our correspondent has more on the story.
China and Europe, a close but somewhat imbalanced relationship. The European Union is the destination of choice for Chinese exports, and in the opposite direction, the EU is China's second largest supplier. But the EU's trade deficit with China has not stopped growing, rising from 49 to 169 billion euros in the last 10 years. At the annual EU-China summit in Brussels last month, it was time for the two sides to clarify their respective points of view.
Due to the differences in our history, cultures and social systems, we do have some differences with respect to our views and positions on some issues.
There are growing commercial disputes between the two countries. Take solar panels, for example. The European Commission has criticised Chinese manufacturers for selling their panels in Europe for well below their production costs, with a dumping margin of 60 to 80%. Tensions also over CO2 emissions tax. The Chinese government flatly refuses that its airlines should pay the carbon tax at EU borders that was introduced on January the 1st. It even forbids them to raise their ticket prices in order to compensate for this tax. For its part, China is protecting itself as well, in setting up an anti-dumping procedure against Europe's wine and champagne producers. Despite their disagreements, the EU is counting on China to help ease the Eurozone crisis. and Beijing certainly won't hesitate in putting its hand in its pocket. According to the latest Chinese proverb, saving Europe means saving China.
Xiaojia, one of the questions that we constantly hear is, does China take the European Union seriously? When your Prime Minister is meeting in Brussels with Barroso and Van Rompuy, does he get a feeling that he's meeting two persons who are talking on behalf of 27 member states, or just two European institutions who are actually quite remote from the daily business of their member states?
Wow, that's really a huge question, but as far as I can see that, I think, of course, China takes EU very seriously, and ideally we would hope that we can, because China is always pro-European integration, and we hope that EU can always speak with one voice and make common actions. I think Chinese leaders have already made it quite clear that we prefer to have a European Union because China has always wanted to have a multipolar system so that we can have EU, China, United States, and some other big powers to maintain this world peace and development. So that's why we prefer EU integration.
Mr. Voigt, I'd like to ask you the same question, because when Angela Merkel travels to Beijing to meet Chinese officials, she represents Germany. She makes statements, for instance, on the dispute regarding solar panels. She says, I would like this dispute to be solved through dialogue. At the same time, the European Commission is launching an anti-dumping investigation. It looks like we aren't speaking with one voice.
I think we do, because we can see that together. First of all, the Commission has a duty to do such investigation if there's reasons for that and if there are complaints for that, to follow that. That is the part of the treaty. And for trade policy alone, the European Union has competence, member states not anymore. But if in the time when the investigation is going on, by negotiation, by dialogue, this problem could be settled in a nice and friendly manner, the better. And therefore, I think it's not a contradiction, it's complementary.
Regarding the trade deficit, we saw in our program that it literally soared in the last 10 years. It's now reaching 169 billion euros. Well, that was at least for 2010. Are you worried about this? Because this is clearly in favor of China.
I think I'm worried about it. One of the reasons is that there is not fair conditions in China. Reasons I have given, but also it's a question of monetary policy, because I believe that the Chinese currency is under-evaluated, which brings a lot of advantages, besides the internal questions of subsidies and licensing and public procurement and all these questions. But on the other side, it's our fault. It's a question of competitiveness. Here we have become better. Also in the Euro debate, we have now this debate. We have to become better. We have to do more for competitiveness, for productivity in the European Union in order to have a chance on the external markets.
I think the Chinese side has already paid attention to this trade deficit or the imbalance problem, and for the past decade, and especially after this global financial crisis and then the Eurozone debt crisis, the growth rate of the China's imports from Europe is much higher than that of China's exports to Europe. So that's the way we are trying to help, and also at the same time, we hope that we can have more technology, especially high technology transfer, and that could move the ball from Chinese side to European side if we can have more cooperation in this high-tech industry.
I'd like to focus on this dispute regarding solar panels, which we mentioned earlier. As you know, a couple of European companies have lodged a complaint accusing Chinese companies of dumping solar panels on the European market. Now, we're talking about 20 billion euros. This is a huge, of course, huge case. The European Commission has just opened an investigation. Are you worried that this will lead to a sort of trade war, or is it welcome to look at these problems?
I think everywhere where hints, we have to look into that it's the rule which we have in the treaties for trade policy, but also it's the rules which have to be applied on WTO agreement. China, which is a very centralized economy despite market economy, which is the aim to do, has to learn that these international legal conditions are binding and that cannot be accepted if they, in a way of intransparency, do try something which does not create these free trade conditions.
How is this dispute perceived in Beijing?
About 2/3 of the Chinese solar panels were exported to European markets last year. So if if the EU is going to put tariffs on the Chinese products, after this investigation, it's going to be a fatal blow to the Chinese solar panel industry. So I think.
Moving to the Eurozone debt crisis, it looks to me that our relationship with China has been radically modified because we rely more and more on China to help us by buying sovereign debt, increasing your participation, your capital at the IMF. Would you agree, Mr. Brok, that the crisis has actually brought us closer together?
I believe that in this global environment, we are so interdependent that we have to take that into account. We have not a euro crisis. We have a worldwide crisis of the financial sector. The European Union has less sovereign debt than the United States, half of it, of the debt of Japan. Therefore, if something goes wrong and one of the grand economies will become a failure, then it would be a disastrous impact for everyone. The European Union is the biggest economic power in the world and the biggest trader in the world. And China is the second biggest.
Yes.
And if one of the two would become a failure, it would be a disaster for the other side. Therefore, this dependence to each other is so an important question that we should find solution in everyone in its own interest to have this pre-competition question solved in order to have the economy going because of jobs reasons, social reasons, which are the same in China. China, with less exports, would have a disastrous internal problems.
And it's already the case now. It's no secret that China has the world's largest foreign exchange reserves at 3 trillion euros, 1/4 of them in euros. So you
Yes.
must be very worried about the fate of our currency.
Yes, very much. That's why the Chinese government has been very anxious to see the EU overcome this crisis so that we can just have a more stable currency and more stable system here. Our premier has made it clear that China is very much willing to further invest in this European debt market, but also on the condition of fully evaluating the risks.
Now, one, of course, very important thing for China is to be given the so-called free market status that would remove a lot of tariffs that they still have to pay the Chinese exporters. What is your feeling? Is this going to happen in the near future, or are you willing to see more efforts from China before that takes place?
I have made certain remarks about public procurement, licensings, and all that other stuff I've mentioned. And this is until a violation of what we see as a market economy status. And therefore, I hope that China is more able to come to practical results in that, not just theoretical debates about it. And also China has to understand that the present worldwide crisis should not be used to come in committing to the rules to certain rebates. And therefore,
that is your feeling, you're feeling that this is the case at the moment, that China is taking advantage of our weaknesses.
Chinese friends, I must say that the way how they debate market economy status, do it in a different way, believing that we need them so strongly that we forget about the rules. We would say a little bit bluntly, and this, I think, is not an acceptable procedure, because then we have problems later. So it's important to stick to the rules. I have to say that I
strongly disagree with you on that point. I appreciate what you said earlier about this, the economy and the interdependence between China and the EU, but I think the Chinese part has asked for this fully fledged market economy system status for years. And this time, our premier came to Brussels and expressed his regret that this problem was not solved yet. So I think we're not taking advantage of this crisis time to give us this fully fledged market economy status. That's the thing we have always wanted for years, and also China is going to be guaranteed this status by 2016, I think, according to this WTO rules. So I think it would be a nice gesture, a very good approach if the EU can at least think about this request, and then because we have been helping and we want to be partners, very close partners. That's how we help each other.
I must have been in wrong meetings with Chinese officials, or have totally misunderstood that. I have made several examples where China has not applied to the rules, in our opinion. And therefore, I think it would be very happy to give the market economy status to China if these problems are met. Since 10 years, it's a repetition of words on both sides. And there's not a millimeter of maneuver forward in this question on the Chinese side. And that, I think, it's a question. We Europeans have not the ability to patience as Chinese have. But in this question, we try to get the same capability for patience.
Okay, it's a matter of patience. Well, I think we'll have to leave it there as we're running out of time, although I would like to carry on. But thank you very much, Emma Brock and Xiangran Miao, for taking part in this edition of Talking Europe. Now, please stay with us. We'll return after the news break. We'll bring you an exclusive interview with a man who needs little introduction, Jean-Claude Trichet, the former head of the European Central Bank. That's in about 10 minutes, so please stay with us on France 24.